Thank you so much for that wonderful performance. Today I'm going to talk to you about the arts during lockdown, but I'm actually going to start by talking a little bit about Isaac Newton, as you can see in the picture. So there were several plagues during both Shakespeare and Isaac Newton's lifetime. There was a Great Plague in 1665, and I just thought it was interesting to share with you that during this time, although England virtually didn't have any understanding of the bacteria that caused the plague, they did seem to understand something about social distancing. And Isaac Newton, who was in his 20s at the time, was actually sent back to Lincolnshire for a whole year during this time to isolate. Shakespeare, on the other hand, during his lifetime, there were three sort of big outbreaks of the plague. During one of them, when he was younger, he was in Stratford-upon-Avon, and during later outbreaks, he was actually living in central London at the time. And we'll talk today a little bit about how those experiences will have differed. So as you will be aware, sort of during following the announcement of lockdown at the end of March, London has been in lockdown, and this has affected playhouses and theatres all over the world. But this was exactly the same in the 16th, 17th centuries, and even before, due to the outbreaks of the plague. So playhouses were also closed in this time as well. And we'll talk a little bit about today how that affected Shakespeare, how that affected actors and playwrights as well. So between 1603 and 1613, when Shakespeare's powers as a playwright and an actor were at their height, the Globe, as you can see here, the famous one that some of you visited, they were shut for a total of 78 months. So that meant that was 60% of the time due to outbreaks of the plague. So it wasn't just the kind of one experience that we've got at the minute. It happened time and time again. So I wanted to show you a couple of these images here, just to compare the different pandemics that have sort of happened between now and the 16th century. On the left-hand side, you can see an image of a plague doctor. And to stop the pandemic of the sort of 16th century, 17th century and before, because as I said, there were quite a few, they sort of had plague doctors that came into villages and towns, and they were specialising in caring for those infected by the disease. Doctors were hired by villages, and they took care of citizens of all social classes, so the rich and the poor. And people were absolutely terrified to do this. And many people actually fled trying to escape the plague rather than stay and sort of and risk death. And the sort of similarity that we have here is that obviously we have very different sort of protective clothing to wear to sort of treat and protect ourselves from sort of contracting the disease. But as you will be aware, many retired medical professionals have actually come back into the profession to treat COVID-19 patients. There's a slight similarity there, but a big difference as well. Okay, so let's talk about then how this affected the arts during lockdown. So while lots of us sort of learning and working from home, lots of us in families who may have been self-isolating during this time, we may have spent our time perfecting our dance moves on TikTok. Some of us may have taken up new fitness challenges, but others, like Shakespeare, may have actually written incredibly famous plays during this time. So during the sort of lengthy theatre closures, many experts believe that he did in fact write King Lear during this time. So I thought this could be something that inspires you to maybe have a go at writing a short story or a poem, or contributing directly to our lockdown anthology, which I know quite a few of you have. So as I said to quite a few of you who I have taught over the years, when we talk about Shakespeare, there are many academics who disagree on what it is we actually know about Shakespeare. Some people think, like Bill Bryson, for example, who wrote a famous book about Shakespeare, some people think that actually we don't know a great deal. Other sort of experts like Andrew Dixon would say actually that's wrong. There are some things that we need that we know. So this is Stratford-upon-Avon, both in the 16th century and today. where Shakespeare grew up. So was it true? Did he write King Lear during this time? Are there plays that we would call lockdown legends? What we do know is that as a child in Stratford-upon-Avon, here and here, we know that he was lucky to survive an outbreak from the plague. He did lose brothers and sisters. We know that his father sort of helped the poor during the outbreak. He held public meetings, obviously outside to socially distance. But we do know that in the summer of 1564, a quarter of the town's population died. So it is a fact that Shakespeare will have definitely have heard about outbreaks of the plague and several deaths. And it's likely that he will have kneeled in this church in Stratford out of remembrance for the victims. So it is plausible that the plague outbreaks affected him both personally and professionally. So we know that Shakespeare was a professional actor, playwright, and a shareholder in a local London theatre company. So this is a little bit about of what it would have looked like to sort of be in a play during Shakespeare's lifetime. Doesn't look like they're doing much social distancing there, but that's what it would have looked like. Elizabethan doctors at the time had absolutely no idea where the plague sort of was caused from. And if you didn't already know, the plague during this time was caused by fleas on rats. So when an outbreak of the plague happened, the authorities, like I say, they didn't know at the time what was causing it, but they did sort of jump to ban mass gatherings. And unfortunately, things like the theatre were the first places to be closed. But it wasn't just that. It was bear pits as well. So bear pits and theatres were the first to be closed. And this was because authorities were just naturally really suspicious of theatre. And for those of you that know the content of some of Shakespeare's plays, they're probably quite outraged by some of the subject matter. But interestingly, a preacher of the time had this to say for the sort of message or justification behind closing playhouses. He said, "The cause of plagues is sin, and the cause of sin is plays." Ironically, theatre lovers at the time absolutely loved to snack on hazelnuts during theatre, and some evidence since then has suggested that hazelnuts actually repelled rats. So that's where the plague actually came from. So maybe they didn't do the right thing closing the theatres. So as you can imagine, it was a really dark period for theatre. Many were forced into other kinds of work, and many died. And those between the ages of 10 and 30 were the most vulnerable. And if we think about what it would have been like, the mood in London would have been absolutely ghastly. There would have been deserted streets. And what actually happened as well, plague doctors would carry around staffs in their hands, and they were sort of reddened at the edges. And it was a way to sort of enforce the distance. So really quite vicious compared to the social distancing that we have at the moment. And churches would have, the bells in churches would have rung out frequently, sort of marking the death of people from the plague as a way to mourn the dead. And the image in the middle here, this is actually Shakespeare's house in the 17th century in Silver Street. So there'll be a blue plaque somewhere in London for that. You know, I love the blue plaques. And this was very near to a church here. So if you imagine what that would have been like, if you're a playwright and you're working, hearing the bell ring for people that are dying that have probably just been coming to see your plays, it would have been an incredibly challenging time to live through. So here we have a timeline of Shakespeare's plays and sort of the historical context, what was going on in this time. So there were 3 major plague outbreaks during Shakespeare's lifetime. So 1593, 1603, and 1608. So let's have a little look at the timeline. Which plays were actually written sort of around this time to make this plausible? So we've got Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, Macbeth, King Lear. We've actually got The Tempest a couple of years after in 1611. So what we're going to think about then is, can we see any sort of links to the plague in the subject matter or some of the language in these plays? So we've got Romeo and Juliet from 1594.
A plague on both your houses. Famous quote there from Romeo and Juliet, spoken by the character Mercutio. Now, Mercutio has just been fatally wounded in a fight with Tybalt, and these are actually his dying words. This is his dying wish, that a plague, a disease, a curse is on both of the houses, the families of both the Montagues and the Capulets, because he blames them. He blames their ancient grudge, the feud that has been running between the families for many years. He blames that feud for his death. He's just about to die and he knows that. And this is his dying wish. And it's quite an important wish because from this point in the play, it kind of comes true. A lot of death does come to both families and they are truly punished for their feud. So this plague does come to pass.
Hamlet from 1601.
In the play Hamlet, diseased is used as a symbol for the corruption of Denmark. Early in the play, it tells us that there's something rotten in the state of Denmark. And in each scene, this idea keeps coming up. One image it gives you that's particularly disgusting is, "For if the sun breed maggots in a dead dog," being a god-kissing carrion.
And King Lear from 1606.
In the speech you're about to hear, Lear is talking to his daughter Goneril in not so friendly terms. Unsurprising really, considering she and her sister Regan have insulted and abused him. "But yet, thou art my flesh, my blood, my daughter. Or rather a disease that's in my flesh, which I must needs call mine. Thou art a boil, a plague sore, an embossed carbuncle in my corrupted blood."
Now, to talk about King Lear in a little bit more detail, as some of you know, it is a story of an elderly king who unfairly divides his kingdom. He's betrayed by his daughters and ultimately descends into madness. So thinking about some of those themes, is it possible that it was linked to the plague and written during this time? In terms of what we do know, we know that it was performed for the first time in 1606 for King James I on Boxing Day. It's the first sort of performance that there is on record. There was a worse outbreak 3 years before, which actually delayed the coronation of King James I. And it might be why we see echoes of it in this play. So moving back to today, 2020, what has happened to the arts during lockdown during this time? So Andrew Lloyd Webber, as some of you may know, has released one of his shows via YouTube every Friday, and he's called it The Shows Must Go On. Now, what we sort of have every week are donations being asked for, because, you know, as you can imagine, with every theatre closing in London and across the world, there will be several actors, actresses, and other sort of staff linked to the theatre that are going to be quite concerned. And there's been sort of reports throughout the media that are really quite concerned about when the shows will resume. The National Theatre Live have also been streaming performances as a way to keep the arts alive during lockdown. I think this might still be available. Fantastic production of Benedict Cumberbatch in Frankenstein, so some of you may be interested in that. But it's not just theatre that's kept things going during lockdown. Gary Barlow has come up with something called the Crooner Sessions, and he works with lots of different celebrities to perform duets. It's just one of my personal favourites that he did with Ronan Keating. But what I've come across the most recently is from a London poet called Tom Roberts, who has actually written a poem all about the pandemic. So there is a little link to this here as well, if time allows. And really what I wanted to kind of end with today was to think a little bit about King Lear, which I think is possible that he wrote it during lockdown. It's when King Lear actually steps into the storm that, although it might be appearing as madness, there is that moment of clarity. There's that moment of sort of understanding about or the path that his future has to take. So that sort of resonated with me a little bit when thinking about what we're all going through with the pandemic. We may have this sort of period of stormy weather, but there is light at the end of the tunnel, and we will come out of it, and we'll come out of it a lot stronger. So if you can stick around at the end for a special poetry performance from the staff at Harris Academy Sutton, that'd be wonderful. Take care, stay safe, and artsies, just don't worry about it, don't lose hope, keep performing, keep writing, and see what you can achieve during a really difficult time.
Hello! It's been such a long time since we've all seen you, and I thought it'd be a really nice idea, whilst you're all studying and looking at poetry in English, for all the staff to do a reading of a poem for you all. So today I'm here to share that with you. The poem we focus on is If by Rudyard Kipling, which I think has a really nice message to think about during this time, about kind of keeping our heads up and staying strong even though times are tough. And I know this time is tough, being stuck inside, and I hope you are all doing so well, because we really do miss you so much. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you.
If you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too.
If you can wait and not be tired of waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies.
Or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good nor talk too wise.
If you can dream, but not make dreams your master, if you can think, but not make thoughts your aim.
If we can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same.
If you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools.
Or watch the things you gave your life to broken and stoop and build them up with worn out tools.
If you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss.
And lose and start again at your beginnings, and never breathe a word about your loss.
If you can force heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone.
And so hold on when there is nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on.
If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch.
Neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much.
If you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run.
Yours is the earth and everything that's in it. And, which is more, you'll make us proud, Harris Sutton.